Tonight we follow Sherlock Holmes into the enigma of the forgotten cipher, a faded code, a vanished truth, and a secret someone would kill to keep. Where in the world are you listening from? Now light a candle and let the mystery begin. In the quietude of Baker Street, when the fog pressed thickly against the windows and the clatter of hansom cabs outside was reduced to a muted drone, Sherlock Holmes sat cross-legged upon the hearthrug, a violin resting idly beside him. I had returned from my morning rounds, and as I entered, I saw him contemplating an unopened letter lying upon the corner of the mantelpiece, his sharp grey eyes fixed on it, as though the very paper might yield its secrets without the seal being broken. "It is curious, Watson," said he, with that mixture of detachment and suppressed excitement which I had come to recognize as the herald of a problem worthy of his faculties. "This envelope has travelled far, has passed through many hands, and yet contains within it, I am certain, a matter of singular delicacy." I picked it up and noted nothing unusual beyond its foreign postmark, Vienna, if my eye did not deceive me. The handwriting, bold yet uneven, suggested haste. Holmes, however, drew my attention to details invisible to my layman's gaze: the faint smear of wax where another seal had once rested, the indentation left by the pressure of a ring, the scent barely perceptible of some exotic tobacco clinging to the paper. "You perceive, my dear fellow," said he, "that it has been tampered with and resealed. Whoever wrote this letter has enemies, or at least an audience he did not intend." At that moment Mrs. Hudson entered with tea, and Holmes, with characteristic abruptness, tore open the letter. The sheet within bore but a few hurried lines in German, which Holmes translated aloud for my benefit. "The cipher is forgotten, but not lost. If you value your life, come to London at once. Seek the one who still remembers." It was unsigned. Holmes tapped the paper against his long fingers, his gaze distant. "Watson, I believe we stand upon the threshold of a puzzle that will demand every faculty at our disposal. There is in these words the echo of an unfinished enterprise, one that may yet have grave consequences." He had scarcely finished speaking when a cab rattled to a halt outside, and we heard quick steps upon the stair. A tall man of military bearing, his face worn and anxious, entered with but a perfunctory bow. He introduced himself as Colonel Wilhelm Adler, later of the Austrian army. "My apologies, gentlemen," he said in excellent English, "for intruding without notice. I am the writer of that letter. I fear I am followed. Time is short. You must help me, Mr. Holmes, or a secret buried for decades may resurface with consequences neither empire nor kingdom can withstand." Holmes motioned him to a chair. His thin lips curved in the faintest suggestion of satisfaction. "You have come to the right place, Colonel. Now tell us of this cipher that was forgotten." And with that, the case of the enigma of the forgotten cipher began. Colonel Wilhelm Adler sat heavily in the chair Holmes had indicated, his gloved hands trembling slightly as he removed them, revealing fingers that bore the roughness of years in service. His face, bronzed from foreign campaigns, was none the less etched with lines of recent anxiety. A man who had commanded troops with certainty now seemed haunted, his eyes darting from the window to the door, as though shadows themselves might conceal pursuers. Holmes, ever deliberate, poured him a measure of brandy from the sideboard before seating himself opposite. I took my usual chair by the fire, notebook at the ready, for I knew that here was to be laid out the true foundation of our adventure. The letter had been but the opening key. Now came the story that would set Holmes's faculties in motion. "You must forgive my agitation," said Adler, after a grateful sip. "I have travelled without pause, and the eyes of enemies are not easily shaken from one's path. I would not be here were the matter not of the gravest urgency." "Compose yourself," Colonel Holmes said calmly, folding his long fingers. "Begin at the beginning. Let us know who pursues you and what this cipher is that men are willing to kill for." Adler nodded, drew a steadying breath, and began his tale. It was in the year 1866, during the Austro-Prussian conflict, that the cipher first came into existence. I was then a junior officer attached to the intelligence corps. There was a code devised by one of our most brilliant cryptographers, a man named Dr. Heinrich Vollmer. He believed he had discovered a method of concealment so ingenious it could outwit any rival bureau. The cipher relied not upon substitution or transposition, but upon a complex series of forgotten languages and numerical progressions. To those who knew the key, it rendered communications invisible within ordinary text letters, orders, even poetry. To those who did not, it appeared as nothing more than harmless words. Holmes leaned forward, interest flashing in his eyes, invisible ink hidden in plain speech, as it were. "Pray continue. The cipher was used but once in earnest," Adler said, lowering his voice. "A document, entrusted to me personally, was conveyed from Vienna to an Allied commander. Within it lay instructions that, had they been intercepted and understood, might have altered the balance of power across Europe. But Vollmer was a man obsessed with secrecy. He alone knew the full mechanics. He died suddenly, some say poisoned, before he could pass the key to any successor. And thus the cipher became forgotten," Holmes murmured, "though not destroyed." Adler inclined his head. "For years it lay dormant. The paper I had delivered was thought ordinary. No one alive, save perhaps Vollmer's closest associate, could have unravelled its mysteries. Yet now, after more than 20 years, I am told it has resurfaced. There are whispers in Vienna and in the cafes of Paris that a fragment of the cipher has been rediscovered, that it may be turned to ends most perilous. I wrote to you, Mr. Holmes, because I could not trust my own service. There are those within it who would sell Europe for their own gain." Holmes's expression sharpened. "And you suspect you are followed by such men?" "Not suspect, Mr. Holmes. I know it. Twice upon my journey I observed the same traveller, once upon the train, and again upon the ferry. In the Strand this morning, a man brushed past me and muttered words in German I did not recognize, but his meaning was clear enough that I was being watched. If I am right, then within days there may be an attempt not only upon my life, but upon the stability of nations." Here he broke off, his voice thick with strain. Holmes rose and began pacing, hands clasped behind him, his figure tall and spare against the glow of the fire. "Colonel," said at length, "your tale bears the stamp of authenticity. Such devices of cryptography are not unknown to me, and Vollmer's name has indeed reached my ears in whispers. Yet one thing puzzles me. Your letter spoke of the one who still remembers. Who is this person?" Adler hesitated. "That, Mr. Holmes, is the greatest mystery of all. I received no name, only a hint, passed to me by a former comrade who begged me to take heed. He said there lives still in London a man in exile, perhaps, who once worked with Vollmer in the early days. This man may yet hold in his memory the principles upon which the cipher was built." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "A ghost from the past who carries within him the key to unlock a forgotten code. Most intriguing. Do you know where we may find him?" "No," Adler confessed. "Only that he has taken to ground in the poorer quarters of the city. If the rumours are true, others hunt him as keenly as I." Holmes stood abruptly and moved to the window, parting the curtain an inch. He observed the street below in silence, then let the curtain fall. "You have done wisely to come here, Colonel," he said at last. "There is indeed a man watching from across the way, a patient watcher, one who smokes a Balkan blend of tobacco, precisely the scent that clung to your letter. The circle tightens already." Adler started, half rising, but Holmes waved him back. Fear not. While you sit under this roof, you are beyond their reach. Watson and I shall look into this matter with all diligence. You must give me a complete list of names connected with Volmer and every circumstance of the cipher's last use. Nothing is trivial. Adler produced from his coat a worn leather portfolio. Within were several documents, Volmer's death certificate, copies of orders written in ordinary language, and a few cryptic notes Adler himself had preserved over the years. Holmes examined them with his lens, making those short exclamations I knew betokened discovery. Yet he revealed nothing to us. Then, at length, Holmes laid the papers aside. "This cipher, Watson," he said, "is no mere antiquarian curiosity. It is the shadow of a weapon forged in another age, and like all such relics, it may yet draw blood if placed in the wrong hands." The colonel left us with evident relief, promising to remain in discreet lodgings until summoned. Holmes saw him out and returned swiftly, his manner brisk and electric. "Watson," said he, "the game is afoot. Tonight we go in search of the forgotten associate of Dr. Volmer, but first I would test a theory. You recall, perhaps, the irregular spacing in those documents?" "I observed nothing," I confessed. "Just so," he replied with a smile. "But I observed much. We shall speak more once the colonel is safe beyond the reach of his pursuers. Until then, sharpen your revolver, for I fear we shall need it before this night is done." With that, Holmes threw on his cloak and hat, his eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. I knew from long experience that we stood at the threshold of danger, though in what form it would come I could not yet divine. The evening deepened into one of those peculiarly oppressive London nights when the fog descends in layers and the lamps cast only halos of dim yellow light, leaving the streets in a half-darkness that seems to breathe with unseen life. Holmes and I departed Baker Street at 8:30, leaving Colonel Adler secured in lodgings he had chosen with care. Holmes, however, remained uneasy about his safety, and more than once he turned to glance behind us as we strode toward the Strand. "You perceive, Watson," said he, drawing me a little closer to the wall as a hansom splashed past, "the necessity of immediate movement. Every hour we linger is an hour in which our adversaries may close their net. The Colonel's tale, if true, speaks of an unfinished drama whose curtain is now to rise once more." "And this forgotten associate of Dr. Volmer," I asked, "have you already formed a theory as to his identity?" Holmes smiled faintly. "I have narrowed the field. Among the scattered records of continental exiles in London, there are 3 names who might conceivably answer our description. 2 of them are dead. The third is one I have long suspected of hiding his talents behind a facade of poverty." We turned into a narrower street where lodging-houses leaned over one another like drunken companions. The air smelled of coal smoke and damp, and from the open doors of taverns issued the rough laughter of dock-workers. Holmes led me with a purposeful step until he stopped before a mean little shop with shutters half-drawn and a painted sign that read, "Books bought and sold." A single lamp burned within. "A bookshop, Holmes," I whispered. "Precisely. A fitting refuge for a man who trades in words and ciphers. Come, Watson, we shall see if Herr Friedrich Keller is at home." Inside, the shop was a cave of dust and shadow. Tall shelves leaned beneath the weight of neglected volumes, and the air was thick with the scent of mildew. Behind the counter sat a gaunt figure with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, a candle guttering at his elbow as he annotated some faded folio. At the sight of us, he started visibly, then recovered himself with an effort. "Good evening, gentlemen," he said in heavily accented English. "Looking for something particular?" Holmes advanced with a bow that contained both courtesy and menace. "We seek knowledge, Herr Keller, knowledge of a cipher created by Dr. Heinrich Volmer." The man's hand trembled, and his pen left a blot of ink upon the paper. For a moment he sat in silence, his thin shoulders stiff, his eyes flitting toward the back door, as though measuring the chance of flight. Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Volmer," he muttered. That name should have been forgotten. "Forgotten, yes," Holmes returned softly, "but not lost." Keller studied Holmes with a wary expression. At length he pushed the folio aside and beckoned us closer. "I was his assistant once, long ago before the war scattered us like leaves." Volmer trusted no man, yet he could not work without one to fetch his references, to record his notes. That was my role. I remember more than I should like. "Then you are indeed the one of whom Colonel Adler was told," Holmes said, his eyes gleaming. "Tell me, Herr Keller, what remains of Volmer's secret?" But before Keller could answer, a noise from the street outside drew our attention. The scrape of a boot against the cobbles, followed by the faintest creak of hinges. Holmes darted to the window and peered through the shutter's crack. When he turned back, his face was alight with suppressed energy. "We are not alone, Watson. 2 men linger across the street, feigning drunkenness. Their eyes are fixed upon this shop. We must be swift." Keller paled. "They have followed me for weeks. I dared not speak, for fear of my life. If you are truly friends, then listen well. The cipher was built upon forgotten tongues, yes, but also upon numbers to spattons hidden in verse, in the cadence of old hymns. Volmer claimed it was unbreakable, but I remember enough to tell you that a fragment survives. 1 sheet. I have kept it hidden, though many have sought it." He reached beneath the counter and drew forth a small wooden box bound with tarnished brass. From it he removed a folded sheet of paper, yellowed with age. He placed it reverently before Holmes. Holmes examined it with his lens. Lines of ordinary German text filled the page, but scattered among them were peculiar gaps and odd diacritical marks, as though the printer's type had slipped. Holmes' brow furrowed, and he traced a line with his finger. "Remarkable," he murmured. "It is exactly as Adler described, harmless to the untrained eye, yet within these irregularities lies a message concealed." I leaned closer, but could make nothing of it. To me it was a page of broken prose, senseless and dull. Holmes, however, was transported. His whole being seemed concentrated into that narrow field of vision, his lips moving silently as he measured rhythm and pattern. But the spell was broken by a sudden crash. The shop door burst inward, and 2 burly figures lunged into the room. One held a cudgel, the other a revolver. Keller cried out and shrank back. I reached instinctively for my own weapon, but Holmes was swifter. With a movement as graceful as it was precise, he swept the candle into the intruder's eyes, plunging the room into near darkness and giving us the instant confusion we required. "Out, Watson!" he shouted. "Through the rear!" I fired a single shot to check their advance, then followed Holmes and Keller through the narrow passage at the back of the shop. We emerged into an alley strewn with refuse. The fog wrapped around us like a cloak. Behind, the assailants cursed and stumbled, groping their way through the gloom. Holmes seized Keller's arm. "Quickly, man! Do you know another way? There!" Keller gasped, pointing to a side lane. We ran, boots striking the wet stones, until at last we gained the broader street beyond, where a cab was passing. Holmes hailed it with an imperious gesture, and we tumbled inside as our pursuers' shouts echoed distantly behind us. Only once we were safely away did Holmes allow himself a laugh, short, sharp, and edged with triumph. "We have the fragment, Watson. Now the true work begins." Keller, pale and trembling, clutched the box to his chest. "They will not stop. You must guard it well, Mr. Holmes. If they obtain this, Europe itself may tremble." Holmes placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "Leave that to me. You have done bravely. Rest assured, your knowledge will not be wasted." As the cab rattled toward Baker Street, Holmes settled back, his eyes fixed upon the sheet of paper now safely in his pocketbook. I recognized the expression well. It was the look of a man whose mind already raced ahead, seeing patterns invisible to all others. The danger was far from over, but in that moment I felt certain that we held in our grasp the first true thread of the mystery. Holmes turned to me suddenly. "Watson, mark my words, this cipher will lead us into the very heart of a conspiracy, and before it is ended, we may count ourselves fortunate to escape with our lives." His words, spoken with such conviction, sent a chill through me despite the cab's close warmth. I knew then that the enigma of the forgotten cipher was no mere intellectual exercise, but a perilous game in which the stakes were life, death, and perhaps the fate of nations. The cab drew us back through the winding arteries of London, its wheels clattering over the stones as the fog pressed heavily upon the lamps. Keller sat opposite us, clutching his wooden box as though it contained his very soul, while Holmes leaned back with eyes half closed, lost in silent calculation. I knew better than to disturb him when he was in that state, for his mind was sifting through the torrent of impressions, isolating what was essential from the trivial. The fragment of the cipher, now in his pocketbook, seemed to vibrate with potential danger. Upon reaching Baker Street, Holmes ushered us quickly inside, bolting the door with unusual haste. Once Keller was secured in the guest room, Holmes returned to the sitting room, where he laid the yellowed sheet upon the table. The lamplight fell across the faded characters, and he bent over it with his lens, while I watched, still shaken by our brush with violence. "Watson," he said at last, "considered our adversaries. They burst into the shop with the directness of men assured of their prize. That tells me two things. They knew Keller possessed the fragment, and they knew precisely where to find him. Such knowledge is not gathered from idle gossip. We must ask ourselves who has both the intelligence and the will to track him so closely. Surely some foreign agent, I suggested, a power that still covets Volmar's work. An obvious surmise, but perhaps too obvious, Holmes replied. Never overlook the hand that hides behind a mask of patriotism. There are motives nearer to London that may prove stronger than those abroad. I pondered this in silence, but Holmes had already risen and reached for his chemical apparatus. He applied a tincture to the page, revealing faint additional markings invisible under ordinary light. Strange dots and accents sprang forth, scattered among the text like stars against a night sky. Holmes uttered a satisfied murmur. Exactly as I anticipated, this, Watson, is no simple substitution. It is a lattice, each dot corresponding to a numerical position, each mark a signal to transpose letters. Ingenious, and yet I suspect the fragment we hold is but a sliver of the full design. Our musings were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, his small figure bristling with official urgency. He greeted us with his customary blend of suspicion and reluctant respect. "Well, Mr. Holmes, said he seems we've had a disturbance tonight. A pair of ruffians arrested near Drury Lane, caught brandishing weapons and muttering about some foreign plot. I thought you'd care to know, seeing as their description matches two gentlemen last seen shadowing you." Holmes gestured for him to sit, which Lestrade did with a grimace, brushing fog from his coat. "We are indeed acquainted with them," Holmes said. "But tell me what name they gave." "None," said Lestrade. "Refused to speak. One had papers suggesting he was a dock worker, the other claimed to be a mechanic. Both lies, if you ask me. Foreigners, no doubt, though which country I couldn't say." Holmes steepled his fingers. And yet, Inspector, you have leapt to the conclusion of a continental conspiracy. Lestrade bristled. Isn't it obvious? A foreign code, foreign spies skulking about London, will have the Foreign Office clamouring for arrests before the week is out. Holmes's lips curved in a sardonic smile. It is precisely because it is so obvious that I mistrust it. Consider why would foreign agents versed in secrecy reveal themselves by so clumsy an assault? They are but tools, Inspector, mere expendable instruments. Someone in London directs their hand. Lestrade snorted, but made no reply, scribbling instead in his notebook. I could see he was unconvinced, yet Holmes's reasoning rang true to me. Our enemies were too bold, too careless. It bespoke confidence born not of desperation, but of influence. When Lestrade departed, muttering about paperwork, Holmes turned to me with renewed energy. Watson, we must follow the trail to its source. There are 3 avenues open to the circle of Colonel Adler, the shadowy associates of Volmer, and the whispers in London society where foreign intrigue often mingles with private ambition. Which shall we pursue first? I confess I have no preference, I admitted. But Adler's tale still leaves questions unanswered. Precisely. Let us begin there. The following afternoon found us at the modest lodgings where Adler had taken refuge. The Colonel received us with relief, though his countenance bore new strain. "Mr. Holmes," he said, "you must be cautious. I have had a visiting man who claimed to be from the Austrian embassy. He pressed me for information about Volmer. I denied him, but his persistence unsettled me." Holmes' eyes sharpened. "Did he give a name?" "Baron Kranz," Adler replied. He professed concern for Austria's safety, but I felt the shadow of threat in his words. Holmes mused silently for a moment. "Watson, note that Baron Kranz is indeed an attaché, but with a reputation for schemes that often exceed his station. If he is meddling here, we must inquire whether he acts with his government's blessing or his own ambition." Adler added hesitantly, "There is more. He hinted that others in England take interest. He mentioned a financier, a certain Sir Reginald Armitage, who has lately speculated heavily in continental ventures. He suggested that Sir Reginald might also seek Volmer's secret." Holmes's eyes lit with that peculiar gleam I had learned to fear as much as admire. Now we approach substance, a financier with connections at court, dabbling in matters of statecraft under the guise of commerce. Such men often prove more dangerous than a dozen foreign spies. That evening, Holmes dispatched discreet inquiries through his network of informants, and by morning he had news. Armitage was hosting a reception at his Belgravia residence, ostensibly to celebrate a charitable endowment, but, in reality, a gathering of political and financial power. Holmes resolved that we must attend. By favour of a friend at the Yard, invitations were secured, and 2 nights later we found ourselves amid the glitter of chandeliers and the hum of conversation. Sir Reginald, a man of corpulent frame and booming laugh, greeted his guests with practised geniality. Yet Holmes's keen gaze observed every detailed glance of an aide toward a closed study door, the presence of a pale gentleman with diplomatic bearing who lingered always at Armitage's elbow. "Note them, Watson," Holmes whispered, as we moved through the throng. "There lies our misdirection. All eyes see the Baron and his embassy. Few perceive the Englishman who profits most from their schemes." I followed Holmes's gaze and shuddered. For all the splendour of the occasion, there was a tension in the air, a sense that beneath the laughter and champagne lay currents of secrecy and betrayal. Somewhere among these polished gentlemen and ladies, our Cipher had become a pawn in a game of perilous consequence. As we withdrew into the night, Holmes's expression was grave. "Watson, we have our first suspect. Sir Reginald Armitage plays at charity, but I believe he covets Volmer's cipher for ends we have yet to uncover. And mark me, he is clever enough to cloak his designs behind others, so that blame will fall where he directs it. We must proceed with caution. Thus the web tightened. Yet even as I wrote these lines in my journal, I could not shake the feeling that we had seen but the surface of a far deeper intrigue, in which the cipher was not the prize itself, but the key to an enterprise darker still. It was one of those bleak London mornings when the sky hangs low and the street seems steeped in melancholy. The events of the reception at Sir Reginald Armitage's house weighed heavily upon my mind. Though all had been outwardly convivial, I could not forget Holmes's whispered observation that beneath the polished veneer of respectability lay the true architect of intrigue. Yet, as always, Holmes gave little away, and it was only upon our return to Baker Street that he permitted me a glimpse of his deeper thoughts. He had scarcely removed his coat before he seated himself at the table where the cipher fragment still lay, the yellowed paper now encased within a protective folder. For several hours he bent over it in silence, consulting a small pile of obscure reference works he had summoned from the British Museum. I, relegated to my chair with the morning newspaper, could only marvel at his patience. Every so often he would mutter a phrase in German, Latin, or some other tongue beyond my ken, then scribble notes in his precise hand. At last he looked up, his eyes gleaming with the light of discovery. "Watson, I have found it." "Found what?" I asked eagerly, springing to my feet. "The inconsistency, my dear fellow. It is always in the inconsistency that truth resides. Observe here this line of text." He pointed to a passage that seemed to me wholly innocuous, read it aloud. I obeyed, stumbling over the German, which spoke of some trivial order of supplies. Holmes smiled thinly. "Exactly. And yet the rhythm is wrong. Vollmer, you see, built his cipher upon cadence. Each phrase should balance like a verse of poetry. Here, however, a syllable is missing. That omission is deliberate, and it reveals the true message when combined with the diacritical marks we revealed last night." He placed a sheet of tracing paper atop the fragment and marked a series of numbers. "Look here, every sixth word corresponds to a hidden phrase. When one extracts them, the sense becomes clear. It is not complete, but enough to suggest the direction of the whole." I leaned over his shoulder and read the words he had teased from the text, "Vault, North River sealed key awaits." They struck me with a thrill of ominous significance. "A vault, Watson," Holmes murmured. "Near the river, something sealed, and a key that awaits. This is not mere cryptographic play, it is a map, a guide to something hidden these 20 years. Before I could reply, Mrs. Hudson appeared with a card upon a tray. Holmes glanced at it and raised his brows. "Well, well, the Baron himself pays us a visit. Prepare yourself, Watson, we must play our part carefully." Baron Cranz entered with the assurance of a man accustomed to deference. He bowed stiffly, his narrow eyes flicking to the folder upon the table before settling on Holmes. "Mr. Holmes," said he, "I have it upon good authority that you are meddling in affairs which concern the Austrian Empire. I must insist you deliver to me any papers entrusted by Colonel Adler. They are the property of my government." Holmes regarded him with polite disdain. "Baron, you speak with admirable conviction, but your authority extends no further than your embassy. This is London, not Vienna. If you wish to press your claim, you may do so through proper channels." The Baron's face darkened. "You play a dangerous game. These matters are larger than one detective and his companion. Others have died for less." Holmes's voice hardened. "And others will die for more, unless I untangle this web." "Good day, Baron." Cranz hesitated, his hands clenched, then bowed once more with icy formality. "So be it. But remember, Mr. Holmes, when the tide of events rises, even the cleverest swimmer may drown." With that, he departed. I exhaled in relief. but Holmes only laughed quietly. An admirable display of bluster. Yet note, Watson, he came here himself, rather than dispatching an underling. That betrays urgency. He fears he is losing ground. What then is our next step? I asked. Holmes tapped the paper with one long finger. We must discover the vault to which Vollmer's cipher points, and to do so we must move quickly, for Armitage and his circle will not wait idly. That afternoon we walked along the Thames, Holmes studying old maps he had procured. North Bank, Watson, he mused, near the warehouses that once served as military depots during the war years. Many were abandoned, some sealed, a perfect place to conceal documents or treasure awaiting rediscovery. We reached a district of crumbling brick buildings, their windows boarded and their doors barred. A foul smell rose from the river, mingling with the smoke of nearby factories. Holmes inspected each warehouse with meticulous care, noting rusted locks, collapsed roofs, and faded markings. At length he paused before one whose stone lintel bore a barely visible inscription in German. He brushed away the grime with his handkerchief, revealing the word Vollständigkeit, completeness. His eyes shone. Here, Watson, this must be the place. Yet before we could examine it further, a shadow detached itself from a doorway opposite. It was Keller, his gaunt face pale with exertion. He had followed us despite our instructions to remain hidden. "Mr. Holmes," he gasped, "you are in danger. I was accosted this morning by a man who offered me gold for the cipher. When I refused, he swore I would regret it. He bore the crest of Sir Reginald Armitage upon his ring." Holmes' expression grew grim. "So the financier reveals his hand at last. He has agents upon every street. Watson, we must not attempt the vault openly. The place is watched, of that I am certain." We returned swiftly to Baker Street, pursued, I thought, by unseen eyes. Once inside, Holmes locked the fragment in his desk and paced the room. "Watson," said he, "we now stand at the crux. The vault contains something of immense importance, but we cannot reach it without alerting our enemies. Yet in Keller's words lies our secret clue, the crest upon the ring. That trifle, insignificant to him, tells me more than a dozen bold declarations." I looked at him in puzzlement. What can it signify? Holmes smiled thinly, his gaze distant. "All in good time, my dear fellow. For now let us guard what we have. The game grows perilous, but the thread is in my hand. Tomorrow we shall tug at it, and see what unravels." With that enigmatic assurance, he settled once more to his chair, leaving me with a heart uneasy and a mind racing with speculation. I knew from a long acquaintance that he had discerned some hidden truth, but, as ever, he withheld it until the moment was ripe. Thus ended a day of revelations, with the cipher's riddle deepening even as the circle of danger drew ever closer. I have witnessed Holmes in many moods, moments of indolence, when he would lie for days in a dressing-gown, smoking his pipe and scarcely uttering a word, and moments of such feverish energy that I scarcely recognized the man. It was in the latter condition that I found him the morning after our excursion to the Thames. He had slept but little, and when I descended to the sitting-room he was already at the table, surrounded by maps, ledgers, and a sheaf of notes covered in his fine script. "Watson," he greeted me without looking up, "the vault is but the surface. It is the forces contending for its contents that interest me. We are no longer engaged in a puzzle of antiquarian curiosity. We are in the midst of a battle between men of wealth, power, and desperation. The stakes rise with every hour. I seated myself, for I had learned that Holmes in such a state would break no delay. "Do you believe Sir Reginald Armitage plays the central part?" Holmes glanced at me with a gleam of approval. "Just so. The crest upon that agent's ring an Armitage seal. A trifle to Keller, but conclusive to me. It betrays an intimacy with the financier's household. If Sir Reginald seeks the cipher, he does not do so for scholarly amusement. What then is his object? To sell it, perhaps, I ventured. Foreign governments might pay handsomely. Holmes shook his head. Too simple, Watson. Men like Armitage do not deal in single transactions. They weave webs of influence. A cipher that can conceal communications may prove more valuable to him as a lever than as a commodity. Imagine what secrets might pass under his eye, unobserved by others. At that moment there came a knock at the door, urgent and insistent. Mrs. Hudson admitted Colonel Adler, whose countenance was pale with agitation. He carried a newspaper in his hand, its front page folded back. Without a word, he laid it upon the table. The headline struck me at once: Mysterious Death at Belgravia Residence. The article reported that a servant in Sir Reginald Armitage's employ had been found lifeless in his quarters, apparently from some sudden seizure. Yet the circumstances as described aroused immediate suspicion. There were bruises upon the wrists, a mark about the throat, and whispers among the household that he had been overheard speaking with foreigners in the street the day before. "Holmes," Adler exclaimed, "this is no seizure. It is murder to silence a man who knew too much." Holmes's lips compressed into a thin line. Indeed, the stakes rise as I predicted. This servant was our link, the man who wore Armitage's crest, no doubt. He has been disposed of before he could betray his master. The Colonel's voice trembled. "What are we to do? They will not stop until they have the fragment." Holmes rose abruptly, his tall form casting a long shadow across the room. "Then we must strike first. Sir Reginald Armitage shall be our next port of call. But not openly, Watson. We must approach with care. I suspect he guards his secrets well. We spent the remainder of the morning in preparation." Holmes dispatched notes to several of his informants, among them the street urchin Wiggins, who arrived within the hour with a grin and a salute. Holmes gave him whispered instructions and a few coins, whereupon the lad vanished into the fog with astonishing swiftness. "Eyes and ears, Watson," Holmes remarked. "When the ground shifts beneath one's feet, one must know where to step." That afternoon we ventured once more into Belgravia, but this time in disguise. Holmes had assumed the aspect of a shabby antiquarian, his beard unkempt and his coat threadbare, while I played the role of his assistant. Thus attired, we lingered near Armitage's residence, watching the comings and goings. Carriages drew up, bearing gentlemen of note and ladies of fashion. The financier's social circle was wide indeed. Presently Wiggins reappeared, tugging at Holmes's sleeve.
"Heard 'em talking, sir," the boy whispered. "Inside there's a locked room where only Sir Reginald and his secretary go. Some say it's full of papers, others that there's money hidden away. But one servant said he saw crates marked with a foreign stamp." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Excellent, Wiggins. You have earned your fee. Returning tonight, I may have further needs for you." We withdrew then to a nearby tavern, where Holmes pondered the information. A locked room, Watson, crates with foreign stamps, and a murdered servant. The pattern emerges. Sir Reginald conceals something beyond mere investments. I would wager the vault we seek is connected to his affairs. "But how?" I asked. "The vault lies by the river." Holmes tapped the table with a long finger. "Precisely. Armitage is a man of means, with ties to shipping. He could move items from the vault to his own residence, or conceal correspondence there, beyond the reach of the law. The cipher serves as his cloak." Before I could press him further, Keller burst into the tavern, breathless and distraught. "They followed me," he cried. "2 men, I escaped, but only just. They will kill me if I remain." Holmes steadied him with a hand upon his shoulder. "Courage, man. You are safer than you believe. Watson, escort Keller back to Baker Street and remain with him.
I shall pursue another line tonight. I protested at once. Holmes, you cannot face these dangers alone. He smiled faintly. Fear not, my friend. I shall not be without company. He produced from his pocket a pair of opera tickets. Sir Reginald is attending the theatre this evening. I intend to observe him in a less guarded moment. Reluctantly I complied, taking Keller back with me while Holmes vanished into the night. Hours later he returned, his eyes alight with triumph. "Watson," he announced, "our adversary betrayed himself." From his private box he sent a note, carried by his secretary, to a man waiting at the stage door. I intercepted it. See here, he laid the note upon the table. It contained but a single phrase. "Tomorrow at the vault, midnight. The key is ready." Holmes's voice rang with suppressed excitement. "There it is, Watson, the proof we needed. The vault is no mere relic. Something awaits within, and Sir Reginald means to claim it. Tomorrow night we shall be there before him. But mark me well, we walk into danger. The stakes are life and death now." As I gazed upon the ominous words of the note, a chill settled over me. I knew that the coming night would bring confrontation and perhaps revelation, the likes of which I had never witnessed. The cipher had drawn us into its shadow, and in that shadow lurked menace enough to shake empires. The following day passed with an air of suspended tension. Colonel Adler paced the sitting-room like a man caged, while Keller remained withdrawn, his hollow eyes fixed upon the fire. Holmes, meanwhile, seemed possessed of an icy calm that only deepened as evening drew near. He busied himself with small tasks, soiling his revolver, adjusting the fit of a disguise, scribbling notes upon scraps of paper, each act executed with deliberate precision. I knew well the signs he was assembling his strategy as a general would before battle. "Watson," he said at last, breaking the silence, "tonight will decide the matter. At midnight Armitage intends to unlock the vault. We must be there first, but not as intruders, blindly groping in the dark. We shall be observers, unseen, until the critical moment." I frowned. "Holmes, these men are desperate. If they catch us," he waved aside my protest. "That is precisely why we must act with subtlety rather than force. A trap. Watson set so neatly that our adversaries spring it themselves." Shortly before 11 we set out, Holmes garbed in the plain attire of a dockhand, while I wore the rough coat of a labourer. Keller, despite his fear, insisted upon accompanying us, claiming that his memory of Volmar's methods might prove useful. Adler too joined our expedition, his military bearing somewhat disguised by a cloak and slouch hat. It was a strange party that crept through the fog-bound streets toward the river detective, doctor, colonel, and exile, bound together by a cipher's shadow. The warehouse district lay deserted, save for the whisper of the tide against the embankment and the occasional cry of a night bird. Holmes led us to the building, marked Vollständigkeit. Producing a set of delicate tools, he examined the lock. "Not tampered with since Volmar's day," he murmured. "Remarkable." With a deft twist, the bolt yielded, and we slipped inside. The air within was heavy with dust, the silence oppressive. Our lantern cast long, wavering shadows upon stacks of decayed crates. Holmes motioned us to remain still, then advanced cautiously toward the far wall, where a great iron door stood half concealed by timber. Its surface bore strange engravings, now tarnished with age. Holmes examined them with keen interest. "Note, Watson, the numerals carved here. They correspond precisely to the pattern in our fragment. This is the vault. And this," he pointed to a small indentation, "is where the key would fit. Yet we hold no key." Keller stepped forward hesitantly. Perhaps the key is not metal, but knowledge. Volmar loved riddles. He may have fashioned a lock that yields to words, not iron. Holmes's eyes gleamed. A plausible conjecture, but we shall not test it now. Our purpose tonight is observation. Come. He led us up a narrow stair to a gallery that overlooked the main floor, hidden in shadow. From this vantage we could see the vault clearly while remaining concealed. Holmes extinguished our lantern, leaving only the pale glow of moonlight filtering through cracks in the roof. Then we waited. The hours stretched. I confess that weariness tugged at me, but Holmes sat motionless, every sense alert. At last, footsteps echoed faintly outside. The creak of hinges followed, and a group of men entered, 4 in all, their lanterns casting harsh beams across the dust. At their head strode Sir Reginald Armitage, his massive form unmistakable, and beside him Baron Crans. The sight of them together confirmed Holmes's suspicions that finance and diplomacy joined in the conspiracy. "Here it is," Armitage growled, his voice carrying in the cavernous space. "The vault, untouched these 20 years. Tonight, gentlemen, we claim what is ours." Crans's tone was smooth, but edged with impatience. "We risk much by coming here. If the cipher fails us, it will not—" Armitage interrupted. He gestured to a secretary who carried a leather case. "The fragment is sufficient. Watch." From our hiding place, I saw the secretary fit a sheet against the iron engravings, aligning marks with numbers. Slowly, he traced them, murmuring under his breath. Then, with a grinding sound, the great door shuddered and inched open. A collective gasp arose from the conspirators. Within lay shelves lined with packets, bundles of documents sealed with wax, and a chest of iron-bound wood. Armitage stepped forward, triumph blazing in his eyes. The archives of Volmer, letters, treaties, codes secrets enough to command half the chancelleries of Europe. Holmes's hand gripped my arm. His breath was low but urgent. "You see, Watson, the scale of it. Not a treasure of gold, but a treasure of knowledge. Whoever controls these papers controls diplomacy itself," I whispered. "What shall we do?" "Wait," he replied. "The trap must spring itself." Below, Crans bent to inspect the chest. But what of the key? The cipher fragment opened the door. Yes, but Volmer spoke of another safeguard. Armitage sneered. "Superstition! I require no key but power." He wrenched the chest open and recoiled. Inside were not jewels nor gold, but rows of ledgers, each marked with dates and names. He seized one, flipped its pages, and let out a curse. "These are records, lists of transactions, payments, betrayals. If such things were revealed, then many reputations would perish," Crans finished grimly. "Including yours, Sir Reginald." Armitage's face darkened. "Careful, Baron." At that instant Holmes rose from his crouch, signalling Adler to ready his revolver. "Now, Watson," he whispered, "the moment has come." With sudden swiftness, he struck a match and lit our lantern, casting its light upon the scene below. "Good evening, gentlemen," Holmes called, his voice cutting through the warehouse like steel. "May I congratulate you upon your industry? You have saved us considerable labor." The conspirators spun in shock. Crans uttered an oath, while Armitage's face went crimson. "Holmes!" he bellowed. "You meddling fool!" Holmes's reply was cold and measured. "On the contrary, Sir Reginald, it is you who have overreached. These documents, once placed in the hands of the proper authorities, will speak eloquently of your schemes. As for you, Baron, I fancy your embassy will find your adventures here most irregular." The secretary drew a pistol, but Adler's revolver gleamed from the gallery. "Drop it," the colonel commanded. The man obeyed with trembling hands. For a moment it seemed our stratagem had succeeded, but Armitage, far from surrendering, gave a sudden shout, and one of his men dashed toward a side door. In the confusion the lanterns were knocked askew, and shadows leapt wildly across the vault. I reached for my revolver, but Holmes gripped my arm once more. "No, Watson, not yet. Let them run. They carry nothing. When the tumult subsided, only Armitage and Crans remained, glowering up at us. Holmes descended the stair, every movement taut with authority. "You may accompany me quietly," he said, "or force me to summon the yard. The choice is yours." Armitage's lips curled in a snarl. "This is not over, Holmes. You think you hold the winning hand, but Volmar's true secret remains hidden. Without it, these papers are worthless scraps." Holmes's eyes glittered. "We shall see. I know more of Volmar's methods than you suppose." With that, he motioned Adler and me to escort the men out. The night air was chill as we emerged, but Holmes's expression betrayed no triumph. Rather, it was one of profound concentration, as though even in victory he perceived layers yet concealed. "Watson," he murmured as the police led Armitage and Crans away, "do not be deceived. We have captured pawns, yes, but the cipher's heart still beats elsewhere. The true key is not yet found, and until it is, the game remains perilous." The morning after our perilous venture to the river vault dawned grey and listless, with a drizzle that blurred the outlines of the city into a palette of smudged greys and browns. I awoke with the heaviness of a man who had passed the night in danger and came out alive but unsettled. Holmes, however, was already at his instruments when I descended, as alert as though he had slept soundly. The documents seized from the vault lay spread across the table in careful order, each bundle tied with waxed string and marked with dates that reached back to Volmar's day. Colonel Adler arrived soon after breakfast, his uniform concealed beneath a plain coat, but bearing that of a soldier braced for conflict. Keller, too, joined us, looking haggard, his hollow cheeks made more so by the dim light. Both men eyed the documents with a mixture of awe and dread. Adler spoke first. "Holmes, you must see that these papers go directly to the Austrian embassy. They belong to my country. In the wrong hands, they could ignite calamity." Holmes gave a dry laugh. "My dear Colonel, the wrong hands are precisely those into which they have already passed. Armitage, Krantz, and their ilk sought these records not for historical preservation, but for leverage blackmail, extortion, manipulation of governments. Before we consider any embassy, we must determine which secrets lie hidden here, and whether they are of present value or only relics of a bygone war." Adler frowned, but Holmes silenced him with a gesture. He held aloft one ledger, its pages dense with meticulous script. "Observe, Watson, payments, names, locations. Some are long dead, others remain very much alive. The power of such a book lies not merely in what it contains, but in the fear it can inspire." I bent to read a page and was startled to see the name of a prominent statesman still in office, written beside a sum of money. If the entry were genuine, it suggested dealings that could indeed rock governments. "Holmes," I exclaimed, "surely this is explosive material." "Explosive, yes," he replied quietly, "but only if ignited. Our task is to ensure the spark falls not into reckless hands." As he spoke, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Hudson ushered in Inspector Lestrade, his expression stormy. He wasted no time in formalities. "Mr. Holmes, I've come to Sir Reginald Armitage. We had him in custody overnight, but this morning blasted it. He was released." "No sufficient grounds to hold him," they said. "Influence at the highest level. The Baron, too, has invoked diplomatic immunity. Both are free men." Holmes' eyes narrowed, though his voice remained calm. "As I anticipated, men such as these do not fall to the yard's net so easily. The real struggle lies elsewhere." Lestrade bristled. "If you've got evidence, by heaven, produce it. We can't jail them on suspicion alone." Holmes tapped the ledger. "Evidence we have, Inspector, but whether it will serve in an English court is doubtful. Documents from foreign wars, names without corroboration. Armitage would dismiss them as fabrications. No, the cipher itself must provide the key." It alone can tie these papers to Volmar's design. Lestrade threw up his hands. Then find your cipher, Holmes. But mark me, if Armitage slips away again, don't blame the Yard. With that he departed, leaving a tension in the room. Adler muttered an oath, Keller wrung his hands, and I felt the weight of futility pressing upon us. Yet Holmes remained unperturbed. He drew the cipher fragment from his pocketbook and laid it beside the ledger. "There is something here," he murmured. "Something all have overlooked. Volmar was a man of vanity. He would not leave his creation without a signature, a mark of triumph. Watson, pass me the lamp." I obeyed, and Holmes held the paper against the light. Slowly, as he tilted it, faint lines emerged, watermarks woven into the fabric of the page. They formed, not words, but a series of geometric shapes recurring in patterns. Keller gave a cry. Yes, I remember now. Volmar spoke of the shadow key, a design hidden within the paper itself. Only those who knew to look for it could reconstruct the true cipher. Holmes's eyes glittered. Excellent. Then we are not yet beaten. The ledger, the fragment, the vault are all parts of a larger mechanism. We must discover the full pattern before Armitage does. Mark me well, gentlemen, he will not rest. The death of his servant proves the lengths to which he will go. At that moment, a knock at the door interrupted us. Mrs. Hudson returned, visibly flustered. "A message for you, sir," she said, handing Holmes an envelope. He slit it open, scanned the contents, and passed it to me without a word. The note was brief. "You hold what is mine. Return the cipher, or Keller dies. Midnight. The docks." It bore no signature. Keller sank into a chair, his face drained of blood. "They mean it," he whispered. "They will kill me." Holmes's expression hardened into resolve. "So the stakes rise once more. Very well. If they demand Keller, then Keller shall go, but not unaccompanied. We shall turn their threat into our opportunity." I stared at him. "Holmes!" "Surely you do not intend peace, Watson," he interrupted. "I intend that Keller shall be seen, but not vulnerable. With disguise, deception, and careful arrangement, we may draw our adversaries into the open. The docks at midnight will be our theatre, and the cipher our bait." Colonel Adler nodded grimly. "Then count me with you. I will not shirk." Holmes looked at me. "And you, Watson?" I answered without hesitation. "You know my place, Holmes. Where you go, I go." A rare warmth touched his features. "Excellent. Then let us prepare. Tonight we shall see whether Armitage is a hunter or hunted." As the day waned, Holmes set about his arrangements with relentless energy. He contrived a disguise for Keller that would permit substitution at the critical moment, instructed Adler in his role as lookout, and pressed upon me the duty of remaining close, revolver in hand. His plan was intricate, relying on timing and shadows, yet beneath its detail lay the steady confidence I had come to trust implicitly. By nightfall the fog had thickened once more, muffling the sound of carriage wheels and cloaking the lamps in halos of mist. We gathered our cloaks and weapons, and as we stepped into the gloom, Holmes spoke with quiet determination. "Remember, Watson, the cipher is but the surface. Beneath it lie men whose greed and ambition know no bounds. Tonight we meet them on the ground of our choosing. Let us see whether they can endure the light of truth." With that, he led us into the fog, toward the river where secrets and shadows awaited. The fog along the Thames that night was as dense as I had ever known it, rolling off the river in billows that seemed to swallow the very lamps whole. The air was chill and damp, and each footfall echoed strangely, as though the city itself were holding its breath. We made our way through narrow lanes toward the appointed meeting place, a cluster of warehouses and piers where the water slapped sullenly against the piles. Holmes strode at the head of our little party, his lean figure indistinct in the mist, but the certainty of his step betrayed his complete command of the situation. Keller walked between Colonel Adler and myself, wrapped in a cloak that concealed his gaunt form. He trembled visibly, but Holmes had reassured him earlier with quiet words. "Courage, my good fellow. They shall
not touch a hair upon your head. Remember, your peril is also their lure. Without you, they would not show their hand." To Adler, Holmes had given the role of silent sentinel, revolver ready, while I was charged with remaining close to Keller in case the need for substitution arose. Holmes, of course, kept the central part of the plan to himself, revealing only what each of us must do at the critical moment. We reached the appointed dockside shortly before midnight. The place was deserted save for the creak of timber and the distant hoot of a steamer on the river. Holmes motioned us to a shadowed alcove beside a stack of crates. From there we could observe the open space where the meeting was to occur. He placed Keller in a position where at first glance he would be visible to any approaching party, while I crouched close enough to intervene should danger threaten. The minutes dragged on. At length, the sound of approaching footsteps came through the fog, slow, deliberate, accompanied by the scrape of boots upon the cobbles. Presently, 3 figures emerged into the lamplight of the dock. One was Sir Reginald Armitage, his bulk unmistakable even in the mist. At his side walked Baron Cranz, his narrow features set in a mask of icy composure. The third man, younger and leaner, carried himself with the wary alertness of a professional agent. He bore under his arm a small satchel. They halted at the edge of the pier. Armitage's voice, thick and commanding, rang out. "Keller, come forth, man. You know why we are here. Deliver what you hold, and your life shall be spared." Holmes whispered to me, "Steady now. Observe." Keller, to his credit, managed a feeble reply. "I hold nothing. The fragment was taken from me." Armitage laughed harshly. "Lies. You were Volmer's shadow. You carry the cipher in your very memory, and we intend to have it. Come forward." Holmes straightened beside the crates, his voice cutting through the fog like a blade. "Good evening, gentlemen. Might I suggest that coercion will become men of your station?" The conspirators started visibly. Armitage swung round, his eyes narrowing. "Holmes! Again you meddle. Merely fulfilling my vocation," Holmes returned smoothly. "You sent a threat to my lodgings. It seemed courteous to respond in person." Cran stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "You risk much, Mr. Holmes. This matter concerns nations. Step aside, and perhaps you may yet keep your life." Holmes's laugh was mirthless. "Your rhetoric is wasted, Baron. I know too well that your interest is personal, not patriotic. The cipher represents for you both a means of power and profit, but I cannot permit you to succeed." At his signal, Adler stepped from the shadows, revolver levelled, while I rose, with mine drawn as well. The younger agent swore under his breath, reaching for his pistol, but Holmes's cold command halted him. "Drop it, sir. You are covered from 3 directions. I advise discretion." The tension was palpable, the
fog pressing close as though eager witness to the drama. For a moment I thought they might yield, but Armitage, his face purple with fury, snarled, "Do you think you have won, Holmes? You have only glimpsed the surface. Volmer's true key is not here. Without it, your fragments are useless." Holmes's gaze did not waver. "On the contrary, Sir Reginald, I possess more of Volmer's method than you suspect, but the law shall judge what weight these papers carry. As for you, your guilt is already written upon your actions, the murdered servant, the attempted abduction of Keller, the unlawful entry to the vault. Your influence may shield you for a time, but truth has a way of piercing the thickest armor." Krantz sneered. "Empty words! You cannot prove." His protest was cut short by a sudden noise from the river. A boat had drawn near, muffled oars cutting silently through the water. From it leapt 2 more men, rough fellows with knives gleaming in their hands. They rushed upon us with a cry, clearly intent on overwhelming by sheer violence where argument had failed. Everything was confusing. Adler fired, his shot echoing across the dock, and one assailant fell with a cry. I grappled with the other, my revolver knocked from my grasp in the struggle. Keller shrieked and stumbled backward. Through the chaos I glimpsed Holmes moving with astonishing speed, seizing a lantern and hurling it to the ground, shattering it into a blaze of sudden light. The flare illuminated the scene with lurid brilliance, startling our foes and giving Adler time to bring his revolver to bear again. Armitage and Krantz, however, used the confusion to their advantage. They darted toward the boat, shouting orders to their men. Holmes saw them and gave chase, but the fog swallowed them swiftly. Shots rang out, echoing over the water, then silence. When the smoke cleared, only the rippling of the river remained. Our enemies had escaped. Breathing heavily, Adler lowered his weapon. They are gone. Holmes's face was grim but not despairing. Gone, yes, but not victorious. They flee because they have failed tonight. They sought Keller, and he is safe. They sought the cipher, and it remains with us. Keller, trembling, clutched my arm. But they will return. They will never stop. Holmes placed a steady hand upon the man's shoulder. That, my dear Keller, is precisely what I desire. For each move they make betrays more of their hand. Tonight they reveal desperation. Next time they will reveal all. As we made our way back through the misty streets, Holmes spoke little, his thoughts clearly consumed with the intricacies of the chase. But I could see in the set of his jaw and the light in his eyes that he was already shaping the final act of his stratagem. The cipher's riddle was not yet solved, nor were our foes defeated, but Holmes held the initiative. And I, weary though I was, felt a surge of confidence. For when Holmes spoke of traps and revelations, the end was never far. The events at the docks weighed heavily upon us all. Keller remained shaken, Colonel Adler brooded in grim silence, and even Lestrade, when summoned, could not conceal his exasperation at the escape of Sir Reginald Armitage and Baron Krantz. As for Holmes, he exhibited that curious duality of temperament which I had long since observed in him, an outward calm so complete as to appear indifference, yet beneath it an intensity of concentration that electrified the very atmosphere of our rooms at Baker Street. For 2 days he scarcely stirred from his desk. The cipher fragment, the ledgers from the vault, and the mysterious watermark patterns were laid out before him in exacting order. He would pore over them for hours, murmuring to himself in a dozen tongues, Latin, Greek, German, even scraps of forgotten dialects I had never heard. At intervals he would rise, seize his violin, and play a few bars of some rapid and dissonant piece, then fling it aside and return with renewed energy to his work. Keller watched him with awe, Adler with military impatience, and I with the familiar mixture of admiration and bewilderment. On the morning of the 3rd day, Holmes at last pushed back his chair and exclaimed, "It is done!" We crowded around, but he raised a hand in silence. "Not yet, my friends. A little patience. The cipher yields its heart only when one knows where to look. Volmer, in his vanity, wove into it a double key, one of words, another of form. Observe." He held the fragment against the light once more, revealing the faint watermark shapes. These are not random. They form a lattice, a grid that overlays the text. Only by aligning both does the true message emerge. He demonstrated swiftly, marking words upon a separate sheet. Slowly, a sentence took shape, disjointed yet unmistakable. The true vault lies beyond the river. Within it rests the concord sealed until the appointed hour. Adler leaned forward, his voice taut. The true vault? Then what we opened was a decoy? Holmes's eyes gleamed. Precisely. Volmer anticipated that men would seek his secrets. He left one vault filled with ledgers to entrap the greedy, but reserved the genuine treasure elsewhere. The cipher fragment was but a clue to that deeper hiding place. "And what is this concord?" I asked. Holmes's face grew grave. "That, Watson, is the question upon which all turns. A concord may be a treaty, pact, or covenant. Whatever form it takes, Volmer judged it worth hiding with the greatest cunning. It is the final piece, and our adversaries will not rest until they possess it." At that moment, Wiggins arrived with a note, his cap in hand. Holmes read it swiftly, then tossed it to Adler. It was written in a bold, hurried script. "Tonight we strike. The concord is ours. Meet us at Blackfriars or be swept aside." It bore no signature, but the hand was Armitage's beyond doubt. Adler's jaw clenched. "Then it is to be decided tonight." Holmes nodded. "Yes, but on our terms, not theirs. They summon us to Blackfriars because the true vault lies there, hidden beneath the old priory ruins by the river. I had already deduced as much from the cipher's mention of beyond the river, and from Volmer's known fascination with ecclesiastical architecture. The Baron and Sir Reginald intend to force our hand, but we shall be ready." He rose, his face alight with energy. "Adler, you will bring 2 of your most trusted men. Watson, you remain at my side. Keller shall stay here, for his part is done. Lestrade, though sceptical, has agreed to provide a discreet cordon. Tonight, gentlemen, we close the net." Evening found us assembled once more, this time at the crumbling remains of Blackfriars Priory. The moon cast a pallid light upon the ruins, the stones blackened by centuries of soot and time. Beneath, cellars and passages honeycombed the ground, relics of an age long past. It was here, Holmes assured us, that Volmer had concealed his true concord. We waited in silence among the shadows. The air was damp, smelling of mould and river water. Presently footsteps echoed on the stones, and through the broken archway came Armitage, Krantz and their companions, lanterns casting grotesque shadows upon the walls. Their confidence was palpable. They believed themselves alone. Armitage strode to a flagstone marked with a faint cross. He gave a signal, and his secretary prized it up, revealing a stair descending into darkness. Krantz bent low, holding the lantern. At last he murmured, "The concord." Holmes's hand touched my arm. "Now, Watson." We stepped forth, Adler and his men at our side. "Gentlemen," Holmes called, his voice ringing in the vaulted chamber, "permit me to escort you to your prize. It would be unkind to let you descend without company." The conspirators wheeled in shock. For a moment, their surprise paralyzed them. Then Armitage, his face contorted with fury, drew a pistol. Adler's revolver gleamed in reply, and the air crackled with the imminence of violence. Holmes, however, remained cool. "I would advise against rashness. The yard waits above, and you are surrounded. Better to yield than to perish in a hopeless struggle." Yet Armitage laughed bitterly. "You think you have won, Holmes, but you cannot comprehend what lies below. The concord is beyond law, beyond nations. If we seize it, we command history itself." Krantz seized the lantern and began to descend, ignoring Holmes's warning. For an instant it seemed he would succeed, but then from the shadows came the unmistakable sound of boots, Lestrade and his men cutting off escape. Armitage cursed and struck out wildly, the pistol discharging into the roof. Dust and fragments rained down. Adler grappled with him, while Holmes leapt to seize the lantern before it toppled into the stair. The struggle was fierce but brief. Overwhelmed, the conspirators were disarmed and bound. Armitage's face was livid, his eyes burning with thwarted rage. Krantz, pale and silent, seemed already to foresee the ruin of his schemes. Holmes straightened his coat, his expression once more impassive. "So ends the chase," he said, "but the mystery does not. The Concorde remains sealed below, untouched. Its nature we must yet discern." As the prisoners were led away, I turned to Holmes. "Have we truly triumphed?" His eyes met mine with that peculiar gleam of irony I had seen so often. "Triumphed, Watson? Perhaps. Yet Volmar's riddle is not fully solved. Tonight we have captured men, but tomorrow we must unearth the truth. And truth, as you know, is ever more elusive than fugitives." With that enigmatic pronouncement, he turned toward the gaping stair, the lantern's light flickering upon his austere features. I knew then that the heart of the enigma lay still before us, waiting to be revealed. The capture of Sir Reginald Armitage and Baron Cranz at Blackfriars should have marked the conclusion of our adventure, yet I knew enough of Holmes's temperament to recognize that the true resolution lay not in arrests, but in understanding. The conspirators were handed over to Lestrade and his men, protesting bitterly, while Adler, grimly satisfied, returned to see them conveyed under guard. Holmes, however, lingered at the gaping stair, uncovered in the priory ruins, the lantern in his hand, casting a pool of light upon the ancient stones. "Watson," said he, "do you recall Volmar's peculiar genius for misdirection? He loved to place a treasure in plain sight so that the greedy snatched at it while the wise perceived another layer beneath. That first vault by the river was such a snare. These ledgers were intended to inflame the avaricious, to draw men like Armitage. But the cipher fragment pointed further, to this place. The Concorde he mentions is the heart of his design." I glanced at the prisoners, now being marched away, and shivered at the thought of what secrets might lie below. "And you intend to descend?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Of course. The final knot must be untangled." He motioned me to follow, and together we descended the worn steps into the darkness. The air grew damp and chill, redolent of age and river water. We reached a low-vaulted chamber, its walls lined with niches long empty of their monastic relics. In the centre stood a stone chest, massive and forbidding, its surface carved with the same geometric designs we had seen upon the cipher fragment. Holmes set the lantern upon it and examined the engravings with meticulous care. "Observe, Watson, each pattern corresponds to a mark upon the watermark lattice. When overlaid, they form an acrostic in Latin pactum occultum, the hidden Concorde. Volmar was nothing if not theatrical. With deft fingers he pressed upon certain stones. A concealed mechanism clicked, and the chest's lid shifted slightly ajar. With a grunt of effort we raised it. Within lay a single sealed packet bound with wax and bearing Volmar's unmistakable hand. Holmes lifted it reverently, then broke the seal. Inside were several sheets of parchment, closely written in Latin and German. He scanned them swiftly, his expression hardening as the meaning revealed itself. At last he passed them to me. My knowledge of languages was insufficient, but I caught enough words to sense their important treaties, promises, lists of names. Holmes explained in measured tones, "This, Watson, is a Concorde drafted in secret during the Austro-Prussian War. Volmar, it seems, sought to bind certain factions in an alliance that would have redrawn the map of Europe. The war ended before it could be enacted, and Volmar, recognizing the danger, should it be discovered, concealed it here. To those who found it later, it would appear a new weapon-proof of duplicity, a tool for blackmail. But in truth it is a relic of a war long past, rendered void by time." "Then all this peril, these deaths, the plots of Armitage, were for nothing?" I exclaimed. "Not for nothing," Holmes replied gravely. "Knowledge, however stale, is power to those who would wield it unscrupulously. Armitage understood that. He could threaten governments with exposure, real or fabricated. Crans saw in it an opportunity to rise above his station. Each man projected his own ambition upon Volmar's shadow. That is the danger of forgotten ciphers. They awaken greed in those who least understand them. He replaced the parchment in its case and secured it once more. It shall be handed to Adler and then to his government. Whether they consign it to archives or fire matters little, for its sting has already been drawn. When we emerged into the cool night air, Lestrade awaited us, flushed with the triumph of a successful arrest. "Well, Mr. Holmes," said he, "you've done it again. Armitage and his cronies will face inquiry enough to keep them occupied for years. The Yard will take credit, of course, but I'll not forget who held the real reins." Holmes inclined his head. "Credit, Inspector, is but a shadow. What matters is that their designs are thwarted." Adler stepped forward, gratitude written in every line of his face. "Mr. Holmes, I can scarcely express my thanks. You have preserved secrets that might have shaken Europe. Vienna shall not forget your service." Holmes waved aside the compliment. "Your thanks are sufficient, Colonel. Yet let me remind you that Volmar's work was itself a folly. Nations should build their security upon truth, not riddles hidden in parchment. Remember that when you consign these papers to their rest." As Adler departed with the packet, Holmes turned to me with a weary smile. "There, Watson, is the final gathering of our threads. The cipher is explained, the conspirators exposed, the concord unearthed. Yet mark my words, the true lesson lies not in what was discovered, but in how greed and vanity will ever cloak themselves in the garments of high purpose. It is the detective's task to strip them bare." We returned to Baker Street in the early hours, the fog lifting faintly as dawn approached. Keller, who had waited anxiously, wept with relief upon hearing that his part in the drama had ended. Holmes reassured him kindly, urging him to resume his modest life free of the shadows that had long pursued him. At length, when all was quiet, Holmes threw himself into his chair, eyes half closed, the faintest smile playing about his lips. "Another cipher solved, Watson, though its language was as much human folly as numbers and codes. You will do me the kindness of recording it, that men may read and reflect. For my part, I shall take refuge in silence and the violin." I watched him for a while as he drew the bow across the strings, a plaintive melody filling the room. The case was ended, yet as always it left me with a sense of awe at the brilliance of my friend, tempered by unease at the darkness of the human heart. In that music, rising and falling with melancholy grace, I heard both the triumph of reason and the sorrow of secrets best forgotten. In the days that followed the discovery of Volmar's true concord, the case wound its way into quieter channels, though the echo of its drama lingered long in my memory. Sir Reginald Armitage, once the lion of Belgravia salons, was confined under heavy guard while inquiries proceeded. His influence, formidable as it had been, crumbled swiftly when exposed to the harsh light of scandal. Newspapers hinted at financial irregularities and whispered of foreign intrigue, though the full extent of his designs never reached the public ear. Baron Crans, shielded by the flimsy veil of diplomatic immunity, was quietly recalled to Vienna. His government, eager to avoid embarrassment, disavowed him with icy promptness. In this fashion, the two men who had sought to control the cipher were undone not by force of arms, but by the weight of their own duplicity. Colonel Adler returned to Baker Street to express once more his gratitude. "Mr. Holmes," said he, "I cannot exaggerate the service you have rendered. Austria is spared a scandal that might have echoed across Europe. I have written privately to my government recommending that your name be recorded with honor." Holmes waved a languid hand, his face betraying more amusement than pride. "Your recommendation, Colonel, will no doubt be intercepted, mistranslated, and filed under miscellaneous, where it may repose undisturbed until the century turns. Such is the fate of gratitude in chancelleries. I am content with a simpler reward, the knowledge that Volmar's riddle has been laid to rest. Adler, nonplussed, departed soon after. Keller, the gaunt exile whose memory had proved so vital, lingered longer. Freed at last from pursuit, he seemed to shed years of fear. "I will leave London, Mr. Holmes," he said softly, "perhaps to America, where I may live as a bookseller with no past. You have given me that chance." Holmes regarded him with unexpected gentleness. "Then take it, Herr Keller. Leave codes and secrets to the dust. They have haunted you long enough." With that benediction, the man vanished from our lives, a shadow retreating into obscurity. Inspector Lestrade, though less effusive, was obliged to acknowledge Holmes's triumph. "I'll say this much," he admitted grudgingly, standing in our sitting room with his notebook tucked under one arm. "You've a knack for sniffing out the truth where the Yard sees only smoke. Armitage and his crew will not trouble us again, though I'll never understand how you untangled their cipher." Holmes inclined his head with mock solemnity. "It is a gift, Inspector, much as your own talent for paperwork is a gift to the Crown. Each of us must cultivate what nature bestows." Lestrade departed in a state of uncertainty as to whether he had been praised or mocked. Thus the great storm subsided. Life at Baker Street resumed its accustomed rhythm, the case filed away among many others in the annals of Holmes's memory. Yet one evening, as I set aside my pen, I found myself reflecting aloud. Holmes, was it worth it? All this peril, these nights of pursuit, for papers that time had rendered void? He looked at me keenly, the glow of the fire reflected in his grey eyes. "You mistake the matter, Watson. The value of the Concord lay not in its contents, but in the uses to which men would put it. A cipher is but ink and paper until ambition breathes upon it. Armitage saw power, Krantz saw advancement, Adler saw national honour. Each was blinded by his own vision. The true lesson is that danger springs less from codes than from the human heart." I pondered this in silence. Holmes continued, his voice low and measured. "Volmar believed he had forged an unbreakable device, one that would outwit posterity itself. He was wrong. There is no code beyond the reach of reason, just as there is no mask that cunning may not pierce. But reason must be wedded to patience, and patience to courage. That, Watson, is the essence of detection." He rose then and crossed to the window. Outside, the fog curled once more along Baker Street, muffling the sound of the city. "Listen," he said, "the world moves on, heedless of Armitage or Volmar, of treaties forgotten and secrets concealed. Today it is a cipher, tomorrow it will be another enigma, another folly. Our task is only to untangle the knot placed before us, nothing more." His words held that peculiar blend of arrogance and humility which was uniquely his. I opened my mouth to reply, but he had already taken up his violin, drawing from it a melody so soft and mournful that it seemed to echo the weariness of centuries. I sat back, content to listen, the firelight flickering upon his sharp features, the smoke of his pipe curling in lazy spirals toward the ceiling. So ended the case of the forgotten cipher. To the world it was but a whisper in the corridors of power, a scandal half smothered by diplomacy and discretion. To me it was another testament to the brilliance of Sherlock Holmes, who pierced through fog both literal and metaphorical to reach the heart of truth. And though the case closed, my admiration for my friend burned ever brighter, for in every enigma he unravelled, I saw anew the triumph of logic over chaos, of mind over mystery. I leave it to history to forget Volmar's Concord, but I know that in the chronicles of Baker Street it will remain, a tale of greed and shadows, and of the singular genius of the man who was, and ever will be, the greatest detective of them all.